Welcome, true believers and newcomers alike. Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee here. Once again, we find our hero Peter Parker, better known around the world as the Amazing Spider-Man, in a heap of trouble. But this is just the beginning, Spidey fans. So get ready for a true superhero action thriller, packed to the brim with thrills and chills, twists and turns, more supervillains than you can shake a web at, and of course, non-stop web-slinging, wall-crawling action.
Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right. Is this our Christmas episode?
No, it's not. It's our episode before our Christmas episode. This is our week before Christmas episode.
Happy week before Christmas. If you're looking forward to a Classic Gaming Christmas spectacular, you'll be sorely disappointed.
Sometimes that's the best part of Christmas.
Yeah. So what have you been up to?
Just chilling in our studio.
Like actually hanging?
Yeah, so I was trying to shimmy across a broken piece of ground where there was a pipe. It was between one of the floors, and I fell, and I ended up hanging from the pipe for about 4 hours.
Nice. That was probably when producer Doug and I went out for corn dogs.
Yeah, I didn't actually scream that loud for help until about the 3-hour mark, because for the first 3 hours, I mostly just gave up.
That's what we usually do. Just give up. Anyway, what have you been playing recently?
Recently, Seth, I've been playing Sonic Adventure 2 via the Steam Deck.
Oh, my Steam Deck.
Well, not anymore. So Seth sold me his Steam Deck. So, of course, I have been playing a Sonic game on it.
Don't worry, folks. I have another one.
I decided to give Sonic Adventure 2 a try because I like Sonic Adventure 2, and I thought, why not play a game that I like on a new console? The game is not deck verified. In fact, it has a little yellow exclamation point next to its name. And I'm pretty sure the reason it's not verified fully yet is because when you boot the game from PC with Steam or just on the Steam Deck, it does give you a window that you have to manually select like visual options on and control options. It's a little obnoxious. I don't know if there's a way to disable that. Anyway, I've just been playing Sonic Adventure 2. It's a great game. The version I've been playing is the, of course, Steam version, which I believe originally came out in 2012, but the game originally came out on the Dreamcast and was later ported over to the GameCube. I own a lot of versions of Sonic Adventure 2 because I own the Dreamcast version, and I own the GameCube version, and I own the Steam version. So I own 3 versions of the exact same game. In the game, you play as various Sonic characters. There are 2 storylines. There's the light storyline where you can play as Sonic, Knuckles, Tails, and then there is the dark storyline where you can play as Shadow, Rouge, or Dr. Eggman. In the light storyline, you're trying to stop Dr. Eggman, and in the dark storyline, you're not trying to stop Dr. Eggman because you can be Dr. Eggman.
Are you trying to stop Sonic?
I guess you're trying to make sure Sonic doesn't stop you. You're not like actively trying to thwart any plans that Sonic has, because Sonic's plans are just to make sure you don't have plans.
Do you have plans?
Yeah, you blow up the moon.
That's a plan.
Yeah. Well, you do it as a threat.
Wait, you blow up a moon as a threat?
Yes.
If that's a threat, what is the action that you would do if you weren't?
You would point it at people.
Oh, I see. So he destroyed the ecology of the world.
Well, he destroyed only half the moon. The rest of the moon's still there. But in the game, Dr. Robotnik has discovered the Space Colony Ark, which is an abandoned space colony that we talked about in our Sonic lore episode. And the abandoned space colony was run by Robotnik's grandfather, Gerald Robotnik. And when he discovers the space colony, he also discovers Gerald's secret project, Project Shadow, which was a artificial life form kind of hedge hedgehog guy. Like, he's a hedgehog that Gerald made for some reason. And you unleash Shadow, and Shadow does a bunch of bad stuff, and Sonic gets the blame for it because people can't tell the difference between a blue hedgehog or a black hedgehog with red stripes. And Sonic gets the blame, gets chased by the police. And yeah, that's how a lot of the game goes. It's like actually a whole bunch of different stories that kind of merge together, where like Knuckles, for example, his storyline is just the Master Emerald has broke, so he's got to put it back together. And he eventually does like collide with Sonic and Tails and everyone. And he's like, okay, I'll help you guys too, because it's, serves my interests. And similar to Rouge, the bat, she's also trying to collect the pieces of the Master Emerald because she wants to sell it for money. And her stuff kind of collides with Robotnik and Shadow, and she kind of helps them out as well. It's a fun game. It's very melodramatic at times, but overall I like it. And it's been fun to play on the Steam Deck. It runs very well on the Steam Deck. I have not had any issues. Anyway, Seth, what about you? What have you been playing?
Recently, I've been playing Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, which was released on December 7th of this year, which is 2023. Since it's going to be 2024 soon and people might be listening to this episode in the future. It was made with a close partnership with Games Workshop and was developed by Owlcat Games, who developed the 2 Pathfinder games, the Wrath of the Righteous and then the Kingmaker Pathfinder game. Both of those games are very good CRPGs that take place in the Pathfinder universe, and Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader takes place in the Warhammer 40k universe because it's there, right there in the title. So you play as a rogue trader, which is a weird thing in the Warhammer 40k world. They're essentially pirates that have the rights to everything that they conquer in the space that nobody goes to. The rogue traders show up and they can take over planets or ships, and they are now in charge of those, and they can take it from other rogue traders. So you play as a rogue trader who's related to this other rogue trader who's like a really powerful rogue trader, and you're in line to inherit their rogue trading business. So I created a character who was an admiral as his job. You have to be a human. You can't play an alien race, which I guess the Warhammer 40k world, they really don't like Xenos. You have to play as a human, and you can play as like a commissar. You could play as a commander. I'm deciding to play as an admiral. And I thought, you know what every admiral needs as their first name? Captain. So I called myself Captain. I think I just did Captain Locke because that's like my default name. And then the best part was, in the game, my character was also already a captain.
Captain.
Commodore Captain. What's great is his title's really long in the game, so it just makes his title look even more ridiculous because it's like a commodore of a very specific ship of a very specific fleet kind of thing. So it's like Commodore Captain of the Void Walker Stalker blah blah blah. It just like goes on, and I was like, well, that fits. But then you meet a Lord Captain, so the people are like, oh, we can't call you Captain anymore. But because my name is Captain, they still have to refer to me as Captain. So there's just a lot of nuances with that. Played about an hour and a half of it so far. It has like XCOM-like combat, where it's turn-based and you have so many action units and you move around. It's farther zoomed up because it's a CRPG, so it's a little more pulled back a bit, isometric view. But I've only put about an hour into it because I am still trying to wrap up Baldur's Gate 3, which I am very close to. So I don't want to start another large overarching role-playing game until I beat one overarching role-playing game. So I've been trying to wrap up BG3. Once I wrap up BG3, I'll probably either play Rogue Trader or play Starfield based on how I'm feeling, and try to get into one of those games a little more in depth, because I haven't given either of those games the times that they require. And then I think I'll probably end up going back to BG3, and where I'll start my my evil characters run. Which
Nice.
will probably be a little more quicker because my current BG3 run is extensive, where I'm doing a lot of side quests. So when I go through an evil game, I probably won't do as many side quests.
Well, in today's episode, we're talking about something very different. We're talking about a game that came out back in 2000, and it is featuring everyone's favorite superhero, Spider-Man. And that game is, in fact, called Spider-Man. Plain and simple. In terms of memories, Seth, do you remember anything about the game from 2000, Spider-Man?
Do I remember anything about the 2000 Spider-Man?
Yeah, we owned it.
I remember... Didn't Stanley shout at you?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah, I remember Stanley shouting, God rest his soul. And I also remembered getting the different colored suits. I really liked the white and blue suit. And I think the different colored suits gave you different powers.
Some of them did, yeah.
And I think the white and blue suit allowed you to shoot ice.
There's one that makes you shoot fire, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if that was the one that looks like cold, but I do remember a white and blue suit. I enjoyed it. I feel like I also remember the fog of war.
Well, there's like an evil fog. I don't know if it's a fog of... It's not fog of war, but...
Well,
yes.
I mean, it's the fog of draw distance.
Yeah.
And I remember all the different cutscenes that you have with all the different characters through this Spider-Man worlds where you have to go and talk to... I feel like Rhino was kind of silly in that game.
Rhino was kind of silly in that game.
I think that Rhino's always kind of silly.
Rhino is kind of always silly. I mean, he's literally just a man dressed as a rhino.
Yeah, he's like very close to being a couple of children's parties away from an entertainer.
Yeah, I mean, if he wasn't like majorly buff.
Are you saying that children's entertainers can't be majorly buff?
I don't know. I'd feel a little threatened if a clown walked in and he was jacked like The Rock.
He's not a clown. He's an animal.
That's true.
If you need a clown, you'd probably get somebody like Shocker or someone.
Yeah, Shocker is a clown. Anyway, I remember the copy that we had was the N64 copy. I remember it being very fun. I remember playing it a lot. Usually I would use cheats. A family friend of ours had the PS1 version, and I was actually kind of jealous of it because the PS1 version not only had cutscenes that were fully animated, but also fully voice acted, whereas the N64 version has cutscenes that are done in the style of comic strips, which are nice, but they're not fully voice acted. I also remember that the easiest setting in the game is called Kid Mode, and when you choose Kid Mode, a voice says, Kid Mode! Thinking about it, I'm like, man, if I let things like that get under my skin, I would have been annoyed by that voice. I also remember there are some fun secrets in the game, like finding the Goblin's Lair in a crane, and when you get into the Goblin's Lair, you can find a comic book cover for the first appearance of the Green Goblin. And then there's also another point in the game where you can go to the Baxter Building, and you can just hang out there, just like the top of the Baxter Building. And there's also a comic book cover for the first appearance of Spider-Man, which was like the first issue of Spider-Man, not the first appearance of Spider-Man, but the like Amazing Spider-Man #1, which features the Fantastic Four. Getting into the history of the game, not too long ago in episode 195, we talked about Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and we covered the early history of Neversoft. As a reminder, though, for those who might not have listened to that episode or don't have great memories, Neversoft was founded in California by 3 employees of the company Malibu Interactive. These employees were Joel Jewett, Chris Ward, and Mick West. Their earliest game was developed for Playmates Interactive for an abandoned toy line called Skeleton Warriors. Their game, also called Skeleton Warriors, was released for the Sega Saturn and PS1 in 1996. Their next game, which was going to be based on Ghost Rider for Crystal Dynamics, was canceled due to financial issues. They then had a few bad years, which included porting the game MDK and the port taking way too long. Neversoft at some point was about to run out of money when they ended up getting to a deal with Activision to create a game called Apocalypse. However, before they began working on Apocalypse, they also started developing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and eventually would release both Apocalypse and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. The game that did better was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and that ended up basically saving Neversoft. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was a huge success for Neversoft, and their next game would also be another big hit, and largely due to the IP associated with it.
The Amazing Spider-Man comic started in March of 1963, with the character first debuting in 1962 in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. For those unfamiliar, the comic was created by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee and follows the adventures of a costume vigilante by the name of Spider-Man. Spider-Man was unique at the time, as he wasn't some millionaire with some love of bats, nor a superpowered alien with a jawline. We're referencing Batman and Superman if you didn't get that. Peter Parker, Spider-Man's alter ego, is a nerd who's mostly just trying to survive high school when he gets bitten by a radioactive spider that gives him abilities. And then over the course of the years from the 1963-ish to 2023, he will get bitten by many spiders.
Man, it's a terrible life.
to go to a lot of high schools, sometimes college.
Sometimes he trades bodies with a villain and then dies.
By the time Neversoft was formed, Spider-Man was already very much a household name. There were TV shows, both live action and animated, with the ones coming out in the 80s being the best, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And there was a few made-for-TV movies, spin-offs, comics, toys, and of course, video games. Because here's the deal. When you wanted to make a lot of money, especially back in the 80s, you could just have cartoons, video games, and toys, because you could market them all at the same time. The first time Spider-Man graced everyone's TV via a video game was 20 years after the character made his debut in 1982. Spider-Man for the Atari 2600 was developed by the Parker brothers, who may have been related to Spider-Man.
Maybe.
And the game puts you against the Green Goblin as you, the player, moves Spider-Man up a skyscraper.
Very robust.
Hey, for 1982.
No, it's not a bad game either. Another early appearance of Spider-Man in video games would be in 1989's Revenge of Shinobi for Sega Genesis.
Oh yeah, everybody comes into that game.
Yeah, everyone truly does. In this appearance, Spider-Man is a boss that you have to fight. Also, Batman is in it as a boss, and so is Godzilla. And like a ton of other references. Spider-Man in the game crawls along on the ceiling, throws webbing at you, and occasionally drops down, and you get a chance to hit him. The character appeared without the consent of Marvel, which is nowadays not a good thing to do, but back in the late 80s, Marvel probably didn't care too much. But later releases do include a copyright notice that say that Spider-Man is copyright of Marvel. Now, Spidey would go on to make his first NES appearance in 1992 for the game Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six, published by LJN. The game is a platformer where you must go against the titular Sinister Six, this time consisting of Electro, Sandman, Mysterio, Vulture, Hobgoblin, and Dr. Octopus. I say this time because the Sinister Six is not always the same six. I think Dr. Octopus is usually always in the Sinister Six, but it varies in terms of who else is in the Sinister Six, I've noticed. The game Return of the Sinister Six was ported to the Master System and the Game Gear. Spider-Man would continue to appear in various games and cartoon makers throughout parts of the early 1990s and into the early 2000s.
I wonder why wouldn't he get the Sinister 8 if he's Dr. Octopus? I feel like
I know, right? I don't know. Maybe Dr. Octopus is bad at counting.
Is there a guy that flies around? He's the Beetle, right? What's his name?
I think that's Beetle.
Oh, it's just Beetle, yeah. Not to be confused with Blue Beetle. He should form the Sinister Six because he has 6 legs.
Oh, he
He's
should.
a Beetle.
I don't really think Beetle does much.
No, I feel like Beetle in the Spider-Man world is kind of like Cobalt Man in the X-Men world, or like Asbestos Man in the Fantastic Four world.
Going back to Spider-Man in video games, one of the reasons that there were some hiatuses in Marvel producing Spider-Man video games, or video games in general, was because toward the tail end of the 1990s, Marvel almost closed due to bankruptcy. This may come as a surprise to fans of the comic book giants today, but in the 90s, largely due to speculation bubble and oversaturation of titles, Marvel was almost no more and completely wiped out.
Yeah, and this is not something that will only impact Marvel in the 90s. It will impact Marvel again in the 2000s, where they would have to essentially license off their properties to companies like Fox and Sony in order to get money to be able to get out of trouble, and eventually leads to their purchase by Disney. And now Disney is doing something that Marvel did back in the 90s and oversaturate the market with titles.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel made some dumb choices, and now Disney's making those choices for them.
Now, Marvel, like Neversoft, would not go bankrupt, as evident by its continued operation today. And in 1998, it was announced that Neversoft was working on a new game featuring everyone's favorite web slinger. The game would be built on the same engine as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. The connections to Tony Hawk wouldn't stop there, as Spider-Man would later be included as a character in Pro Skater 2, and a reference to the Tony Hawk games would be included in the final version of Neversoft's Spider-Man. Music for the game would be composed by Howard Ulate and Tommy Tallarico, and was inspired by nu metal and industrial rock. A remixed version of the 1960s Spider-Man animated series theme song would serve as the theme song for the game, with the remix being done by Apollo 440. The game also has voice acting, and the PlayStation, PC, and Dreamcast versions have fully 3D rendered cutscenes. However, the cutscenes for the N64 version are done in the style of still comic panels and don't contain voice acting because it's on a cartridge. Now, there are, however, still in-game voiceover work, which was impressive for being a cartridge. The narrator is none other than Stan the Man Lee, who, according to Chad Findley, the lead designer of the game, gave every line he read 110%, and that he would not move on until he gave it the delivery he thought it deserved. I mean, Stan Lee gave even his lines and his cameos up until his death. Lines.
Yeah. He loved doing those cameos.
Other cast members include Jennifer Hale as Black Cat and Mary Jane Watson, reprising her role as Black Cat from the 1994 animated series, and Mary Jane from the Spider-Man Unlimited. Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Dr. Octopus, reprising his role from the 1994 animated series. Darren Norris as Venom, Mysterio, Scorpion, Punisher, Human Torch, and Captain America. And D. Bradley Baker as Carnage, J. Jonah Jameson, Lizard, Daredevil, and Rhino. Spider-Man is voiced by Reno Romano, who also was the voice of Spider-Man in the TV show Spider-Man Unlimited.
The game is very much like a reunion for Spider-Man Unlimited in 1994 animated series Spider-Man. So if you like those shows, you'll probably like this game. Now, the game did go through some changes in development. According to an interview with Chad Findley, conducted by the YouTube channel Always Nerdy, the developers came up with a list of characters that they wanted to include in the game, reportedly with around 50 different characters because the story hadn't been finished yet. So they were just coming up with characters they thought would be fun to include in the story and came up with this big list. Marvel, per Chad, didn't reject any. So they would send over the list of characters they thought would be fun to include, and Marvel was like, we don't care. And when they finally did finish the story, they still had, according to Chad, like 30 something characters that they wanted to keep in the game in some form. So they had to trim it down a little bit more, but this ultimately led to the development of What If mode, which of course is based on the comic series What If, complete with the fact that when you start What If mode, Uatu, the Watcher, provides the narration instead of Stan Lee.
That's fun. And he's another character.
In the What If mode, the game plays pretty much the same, except there are changes. For example, characters that weren't included in the main storyline now appear in the main storyline, such as if you go to the Baxter building, the Human Torch will be there and he'll chat with you for a bit. There's also a couple other sequences that don't happen, such as a scene where Spider-Man breakdances for some reason.
Yeah, and in the very first What If comic that was ever written, the What If was what if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, it is.
It's a pretty silly comic, especially the early What Ifs.
Now, another element added to the game was, as Seth had remembered, a variety of costumes for Spider-Man, some providing additional abilities. These outfits included Ben Reilly's Spider-Man outfit, both his Scarlet Spider suit and another suit that he wore, the Bombastic Bagman from The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 258, Spider-Man Secret War symbiote outfit, Spider-Man Unlimited's outfit, Spider-Man 2099's outfit, Captain Universe, Peter Parker out-of-costume outfit, and Quick Change Spidey, where Peter Parker is wearing his street clothes but has his Spider-Man costume underneath his street clothes. So it looks like Spider-Man is in a suit.
I think that the Peter Parker out-of-costume outfit, he is not wearing shoes.
I think you're right, yeah. Seth, I think the costume you might be remembering is there's also, I think, like a metal Spider-Man outfit where he is blue and white.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of looks like he's made of ice.
That's the costume I'm remembering, but he's metal Spider-Man. I feel like there's a lot of metal in N64, like characters becoming metal in N64.
People loved metal people. The costumes would be unlocked by completing tasks in the game or finding secrets, or you could just cheat. Like I did. There was a cheat where you can just unlock all the costumes. There are also some comic book covers that you could find in various spots. These covers are themed on the level you're in or a character you encounter in this level. So for example, when you encounter the symbiotes, you will find a comic based on the first appearance of the symbiotes. When you encounter Dr. Octopus, you will find a comic about the first appearance of Dr. Octopus. There's also the first appearance of Spider-Man, like comic cover in the first level somewhere. So they try to keep the comic covers in theme with what's going on in the game.
The earliest version of the game that is known is there is footage that was featured on a demo disc that was released in Germany. Some of the changes that are found in the footage that is different from the game that would go on to be released is that there's a different model for Scorpion based on his original appearance with a completely green outfit. They have placeholder music and some other content that was cut from the final game. A version of the game was also developed for the Game Boy Color. As the Game Boy Color could not possibly replicate the gameplay of a version for the PC, Dreamcast, N64, PlayStation 1, it features substantially different gameplay, with an entirely game being a platformer with some of the levels from the games being replicated in 2D styles. The PS1 version and the Game Boy Color version of the game were released in September of 2000, the N64 version released in November of 2000, the Dreamcast version released in May of 2001, and the Windows version released in September of 2001. A Mac OS X port was also released in January of 2002. Now, I also know that each of the games, as we mentioned before, some of the games had cutscenes, some of them just had the comic book panels. The Dreamcast version, I think, has better graphics.
So the Dreamcast version has substantially better graphics to the PS1 and N64 version, yes. But the PC version is identical to the Dreamcast version.
Dreamcast version, yes. The PC version uses the Dreamcast version, and Black Cat and Mary Jane are two different models in the Dreamcast version, but in the N64 version and the PlayStation 1 version, they are the same character model that was very buxom.
I do think it's funny that they are the same character model because it's the same voice actress. So
yeah, they're like, whatever.
Mary Jane is just also secretly Black Cat.
No, I think Felicity Hardy is secretly Black Cat.
Yes, very true. Now, Spider-Man is an action-adventure game where you take on the role of the titular Spider-Man. Your job is to swing around and fight bad guys, because that's what Spider-Man does. The game plays in a third-person perspective. Levels are big, at least for the time, with the first stage almost feeling open world to a point, though there are some obvious restrictions. You can only go to some buildings, and you can't go to other buildings, and if you go too far, you die. So one of these restrictions is that, and this restriction is actually backed up by the plot, Spider-Man can't go to the ground of the city. He can only swing around from top of the buildings. The reason Spider-Man can't go to the ground of the city is because there is a ugly fog that has engulfed the city, and this is a plot point. This isn't just like the game can't render buildings, which was true, but also it's a plot point that there is an ugly fog that has engulfed the entire city. In terms of his abilities, Spider-Man is able to use all of the abilities you might be familiar with from the comics. He can swing, he can climb, he can shoot web. His webbing abilities are kind of interesting. He has one where he can wrap up an enemy until they're incapacitated. Another is he pulls an enemy toward them and then he punches them. He can also create a projectile web ball that does decent damage, and another ability to create a dome of web that will explode and do an area of affected damage. There are also portions of the game with stealth, where you must avoid raising attention to yourself or run the risk of hostages being killed or a bomb being detonated. If you run out of webbing to tie people up, no worries, Spider-Man has the thing that he always also carries with him, his fists, and you can beat enemies up. Now, the story itself involves Spider-Man being accused of stealing equipment from Dr. Octavius during an expo. Eddie Brock, working as a photographer, has his camera smashed by Spider-Man. He gets really mad and he turns into Venom. Spider-Man wants to prove his innocence, so he sets out on a journey to figure out who stole the equipment and also who stole his identity. At the same time, a mysterious fog, as mentioned, has engulfed the city. As Spider-Man, you team up occasionally with Black Cat, who mostly just comes in to tell you stuff and then she goes away, so it's not really teaming up. And the first thing she does tell you about is a robbery being conducted by the Jade Syndicate. After you fight the robbers, you then have to go save J. Jonah Jameson, who's being attacked by Scorpion. After you go save J. Jonah Jameson, Daredevil shows up and you say hi to him for a bit. And then you have to go to save Mary Jane from Venom, because Venom still thinks that you broke Eddie Brock's camera, but then Venom realizes that you didn't do it, and it's all a big misunderstanding, and you kind of team up with Venom, and then you fight the Rhino, and then you meet the Lizard, and the Lizard is just kind of like chilling, and he's not mad at you or anything, he's just there, and then you find out that it was Mysterio who stole your identity the whole time. After you finally defeat Mysterio, symbiotes began to flood the street. It's revealed that the fog was actually designed to help control the New York population to make them easily able to be adapted to by the symbiotes. You must then go stop the symbiotes, and you find out that they are being controlled, in fact, by Dr. Octopus and Carnage, who've decided to team up. After you defeat Dr. Octopus, him and Carnage fuse together and create Monster Ock. That is this giant, scary thing that you don't even fight, you just run away from, and then it dies. then the game ends and it's all a good day. The very last scene of the game is you're just chilling with like Captain America, the Human Torch, Black Cat, and some other superheroes, and you're just having a pizza party and you're all dancing. And then it cuts to like all of the prisoners in jail and they're complaining about how bored they are. It's very good.
Aren't they also playing a game in jail?
They're playing Go Fish.
Yeah. Now, to talk about how well Spider-Man did, Spider-Man scored very well. All the versions of the game received 4 out of 5 stars from the publication All Game. EGM gave the Dreamcast version a 7.5 out of 10, the N64 version a 7 out of 10, and the PS1 version a 7.83 out of 10. Next Generation rated the Dreamcast and PS1 version a 4 out of 5. IGN at the time called the PS1 the best Spider-Man game and ranked that version 9 out of 10. However, they rated the Dreamcast version as a 8.4 out of 10, largely complaining that the game isn't that different from the PS1 version, despite the better hardware, the improved graphics, and the changes in the models. They also rated the PC version a 6 out of 10, complaining that it is a 1-for-1 port of the Dreamcast version with 0 differences, which I believe is accurate. According to an IGN article from the time, Spider-Man held the number 2 position for games sold by third-party publishers in the time between September 3rd to September 9th of 2000. The article also mentions that Spider-Man was number 4 on the top 10 PlayStation titles of the summer of that same year. Activision would, as IGN noted, be the only US publisher to show triple-digit year-over-year growth on a monthly basis in dollars for the last 10 consecutive months. In Europe alone, it sold over 300,000 copies, earning the game a Platinum Award from the Entertainment and Leisure Software Publishers Association.
In terms of legacy, Spider-Man did well enough that it got 3 sequels. Not like Spider-Man 2, 3, and 4. No, it got 2 sequels called Spider-Man 2 and a 3rd sequel that did not have a number. The first sequel was released in 2001 and was a sequel exclusively to the Game Boy Color version called Spider-Man 2 The Sinister Six. I'm going to spoil it for you. The Sinister Six are in that one. The other sequel, also called Spider-Man 2, but this time called Enter Electro, came out in 2001 but for the PS1.
Was Electro in that one?
Spoiler alert, Electro shows up. A third, completely standalone sequel came out also in 2001, but this time for the Game Boy Advance, called Spider-Man Mysterio's Menace. And I'm going to throw a hardball at you. Mysterio is the villain in that one.
So, isn't every iteration of any game after the first Spider-Man, if it's got Spider-Man in it, couldn't it just also be a sequel as long as it doesn't cover the same events that happened in the first game?
Yeah, I guess so.
And I don't even think in the first game it covers him getting bitten by a spider. I think you literally start as Spider-Man on a rooftop for the first level.
He's also older Spider-Man in this game. He's already married to Mary Jane.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And he's like cheating on her with Black Cat.
Yeah, which is classic Spider-Man.
But yeah, so I feel like every game that follows the Spider-Man could just be Spider-Man, and it's just implied that it's the sequel.
Now, there has been talk of doing a remaster of the 2000 Spider-Man game, but Chris Finley has stated that it would likely be a nightmare due to the fact that just the licensing and approval process alone would be a problem. Activision held the license for Spider-Man until 2014, and so once they lost it, it was on to the next. And more Spider-Man games would eventually come out in the years that followed, and I guess you could pretend they're sequels to this one, but they are different canons, they have different actors and everything. I do think that the more recent Spider-Man games, the one that have been released by Insomniac, do have some references to these classic games. While there isn't like overt references to them, at least none that I can remember, there's a sequence in the Insomniac game where you're fighting Mysterio, and he does in fact flood the city, or at least he floods your imagination with images of the city being filled with a dangerous fog. And it kind of reminds me of imagery from the PS1 game, and I think that's intentional. Now, that will do it for our Spider-Man, the Neversoft game episode. We're going to move into our retro rewind. So Seth had me play Star Wars Dark Forces. Developed by LucasArts in 1995 for MS-DOS, the game is basically Doom, but with Star Wars paint. You play as everyone's favorite asshole, Kyle Katarn, who's on a quest to steal the Death Star plans, which was retconned in Rogue One, so Kyle Katarn no longer gets the responsibility of stealing the Death Star plans. I like Dark Forces. It's a fun game. Arguably, it's a game that holds up very well, but also, I don't think it's the best one of the series, because you don't even get a lightsaber. And I prefer Jedi Outcast. If you had to line up all the Dark Forces games in a row, it would go Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy, which Kyle Katarn is in, but you don't even play as him, Jedi Knight, and then Dark Forces.
So I gave you your worst favorite?
There's all still great games. Like, I love them. They're not bad games. Like, you know, it's not a terrible game. It's just not my favorite because I prefer being able to use the Force. I am, however, very excited for the remaster from Night Dive. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to pick it up. I definitely am going to pick it up. And I hope they eventually do remaster some of the other games. I kind of want to see a remaster of Jedi Knight, and maybe even do a remaster of Jedi Outcast would be kind of cool with an updated engine or something. Does Dark Forces hold up? Absolutely. It holds up very well. It's a very fun game. Go pick it up if you haven't played it yet, or wait for the remaster or whatever. Seth, next week you can play X-Men 2 Clone Wars for the Sega Genesis.
Zach had me play Super Star Wars for the SNES, developed by Sculpture Software and published either by JVC or LucasArts, depending on what you pick up. Zach didn't tell me which Super Star Wars I had to play since there's 3 of them, so I played Super Star Wars, period. Is that the New Hope one? Isn't that just called Super Star Wars?
Yeah, so there's Super Star Wars, Super Empire Strikes Back, and Super Return of the Jedi. You were playing Super Star Wars.
Arguably, they're all Super Star Wars. I played the original. Super Star Wars was released in 1992, and it's a very nostalgic game for me since we used to play them at our family friend's house. I think they had all 3. They are tough. They are notoriously tough since the game is a run and gun game that you actually have to play slowly, which is against what most run and gun games have you do. But if you play a run and gun game, so if you play like Gunstar Heroes or something like that, and then you play this, you're running through and you're like going through the level real fast, you're shooting, you're dodging. If you do that with Super Star Wars, you will die. The spawn rate is higher for all the creatures, and your jump is delayed because your character actually has to bend their sprite before they jump. And if you don't know they do that, you're going to die in the platforming section. It makes the game very difficult. The whole series is pretty difficult. I always, when I was a child, enjoyed the Mode 7 land speeder section where you fly around with the land speeder. I only enjoyed it as a child because I thought it was cool that it changed from the side scroller to the land speeder in the 3D. However, as an adult, I just get confused with what I have to do in trying to find all the Jawas. The game definitely holds up, especially if you like platformers in Star Wars. You do have to slog through the desert part of the game, which is the first part. So probably the toughest part of the game, or at least like the part where the flaws of the game really shine, are right in the beginning. And the game does get better. You eventually get to unlock Han and Chewie, and then you get to go through the Death Star, and it really represents the movies in a fun way. Unlike the future Super Star Wars games, Super Empire and Super Return, the original Super Star Wars, covering the events of the New Hope, does not have a password system. Empire and Return do. So if you play OG style, then it makes the game that much more difficult. But if you have save states and all that, have fun. It's a great game. It's a lot of fun. Love blasting people in it. Next week, Zach, you can play Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Sega Genesis.
Okie dokie. Now, thank you everyone for tuning in to Classic Gaming Brothers. Be sure to let us know what you thought of this episode. Do you remember playing Spider-Man? Do you remember playing Spider-Man?
Spider-Man?
Spider-Man! Be sure to let us know your memories of Spider-Man and other games. And by doing so, you can email classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us via X at CG Brothers Pod, Blue Sky at CG Brothers Pod, or Facebook and Instagram at Classic Gaming Brothers. We're available wherever podcasts can be found out there, be it iHeartRadio, Podbean, or iTunes. And of course, be sure to check out our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. We have a website store where you can buy merch if you want a t-shirt with our face on it for Christmas. It sounds like a terrible gift. That's worse than getting coal. Anyway, Seth, did I forget something?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
We've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we have. That's